it's still at 40 higher. And this sentiment is something that we're going to feel from a lot of these lengthy remarks. We're just going to get the snarky attitude with how Team Cherry has approached this game's development. And there is lessons to be learned from Silksong's development. That is quite clear. Financial and creative flexibility has been greater than something that the AAA space especially. Negative comments coming from this r/gaming subreddit. Many people doubting that a Metroidvania was going to make it. It's just going to be another game people would ignore. Unfortunately, we've seen people twist this thing. Negative comments. Whether it's a game, a company, or any kind of concept, any dream worth having is a dream worth fighting for. For I discover we might be in our Hollow Knight era compared to our beginnings to look forward to. And again, I highlighted this specific r/gaming somewhat a common, most of the negative comments that are attributed to this. But again, this stopping number of game developers. Specifically, we had this one. As a former Techland marketing manager, he actually had a number of AAA developers liking this post of Ubisoft, Xbox, Techland, NetEase, Bethesda, Konami, and so on. He said, "That's fine. This is a new MCP of wisdom." And we saw another developer, this being an indie one, saying, "I think the biggest reason why everyone is trying to do Silksong analysis is because they think it's a pathway to copying their success. To be told, however, that isn't going to happen. There is no magical formula to make your own Silksong level launch. That's it. That's all there needs to be said about it. This remark coming from former dev and employee of 2K Games, Blizzard, and Netflix games, and it was interacted again by many indie and AAA developers. Your Silksong analysis doesn't matter. It brings almost no learnings to anyone except maybe one handful of games to the hundreds of thousands out there being developed. If you're here to better inform 5 people in the internet, congrats, they didn't read it. Now another indie dev can read your analysis, do everything you laid out, and not perform any better, and more likely worse than they would have. For those with joke analysis, well done, you hit the sweet spot." And then many individuals reacted to this. This was actually a games industry exec saying, "I am with you. Games like this are so special in their success story. It's nice to witness and give mucho high five to the band of brothers, but not try to emulate it or get all wise ass. It's not super wise to say, make a great game and sell it to a strong community and lots of fans for a very affordable price." We saw another indie game dev interacting with this saying, "Wait, so delaying audience gratification beyond the threshold of insanity shouldn't be the foundation for a fledgling studio's business plan? Well, fuck." We also saw another game dev saying, "Have indie devs simply considered making their game the next Silksong?" We also saw a former EA director of live service saying, "Ah yes, the 15-year-long strategy to grind it out and hit the lottery." And this leads next to a different remark. This is actually, I think, a very sane remark coming from a former Blizzard animator who said Concord took $400 million to make with a team of 150 plus people. He said his Roblox game cost him $400 to make with a team of 1 person. Can you guess which game has had more players? The writing has been on the wall for a long time. I think this year in particular, it's really clear as freaking day where the industry is headed. indie revolution. And I really don't think that is that far of a take, especially when you see so many of these so-called outlier experiences taking off. It's happening more and more. Obviously, I'm not saying of the hundreds and thousands of indie games, every single one's going to be the next juggernaut. But I do think a lot of the innovation, a lot of the creativity that is happening is from the indie space. And we're seeing that with the amount of Game of the Year contenders that are going to be, at these award shows later on this year coming from that space, or the AA space. Now, this may not come as a surprise, but some developers disagreed with this perspective. First, we have a former Sony online lead dev. He also worked at Blizzard as a lead dev, saying Concord's failure was all over the press because a AAA game bombing is unusual. But that's just not true at all. You don't see the press go nuts when an indie game fails because that's the norm. AAA isn't going anywhere. And it's a AAA game hits, it makes orders. On the other side of the fence, it's hard to see it dilute because they're easy to it's worth it since indies were cool new things. Developer might as well buy a lottery ticket. And the same individual behind this specific remark, which your Silksong analysis doesn't matter, also remarked on this, saying, exactly, publishers are still making 90% of revenue and AAA is still dying. Folks want to look at some narrative that isn't backed by data. Winners are winning more. Devs on Roblox aren't winning. The platform is. The devs on Steam aren't winning. The publishers on the platform. The devs on UEFN aren't winning. The proper way to look at this, but the lottery company folks don't seem to understand the winning creating to stand for an indie scene. We have no middle ground because we can't even get where we stand we saw another developer, another individual, again, another Silksong type thing. I don't understand. It's actually a former writer saying, I don't think I understand the Silksong discourse. It seems everyone was mistaken waxing about industry trends. The thing to say about it I swear I'm not trying to be contrarian. I genuinely want to know what I'm missing. We actually saw a Stalker 2 game designer responding, saying making a hit once doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to repeat the success. People learn more from failures. And look, the opinions, the discussion about Silksong has actually bled into another discussion that happened just a couple of days ago. This is an opinion that came from Baldur's Gate 3 when I think it was the executive in charge of publishing. He said that AAA is professionally fascinated by indie games. Those that still understand the ideas said specifically on his Twitter account, much of the industry has been aggressively data-driven for so long. Over generations of talent, the ability institutionally and intellectually to lead with your gut has been a star. This is why AAA is becoming perversely fascinated by indie. Indie doesn't have the data, much more than gut. Sometimes you see games that are very specific things. TLDR, it's because the means to do something you want to do have shrunk because of a bunch of silly shit. And I actually don't think that is that much of a hot take, but again, many developers in the gaming industry, especially on the old LinkedIn website, have opinions about this. We first saw a former certain Infinity developer saying AAA needs to trust their gut feeling, and indies need to learn to do data more. We also saw like that saying both. There is no one good way. A complex process, and both things are important. However, if a project has no soul, it will show on the screen as well. We saw an indie developer saying, speaking as a full-time indie, Larian mentioned the survival rate by year 5, 50% of indies are still alive, while 75% of AAA companies are. By comparison, this isn't an incremental difference in survivability, it's definitive. We can lecture the corporate world about creativity as much as we want. They ensure that the creative power to continue these self-serving we are top 16% of indie devs who can maintain livable salary. There's much more for indies than that. There's highly capable indies or individuals that understand how to generate an income significantly more in value than the other way around. We also saw a former exile Ubisoft developer saying analytics are largely under interpretation, and often can have severely negative impact on the brand and game. Serious time and seeing Megacorp after Megacorp usurp thriving and all their intellectual property over value over the course of 1 year. Games made without passion are shit. We also saw a former EA lead designer give his opinion on this. Having worked in AAA indie, this headline is from someone who perhaps hasn't.
Regina Fora.
They only take you so far if you want to avoid being derivative. And we next saw a former Epic Games designer saying the thing is, even in AAA companies, most devs now have those ideas for red tape, corporate politics, and career advancement programs, and such make it that implementing or realizing those ideas will not happen, and discussing them is not. You really think that people would trust parts of the team know what saw and props and this is something one of the first comments one of the individuals that said Call of Duty, those developers are happy. We all understand that is the broken nature of the That's why when we look at Larian, when we look at what the Soundfall when you have indie darlings like Hollow Knight, Silksong, Expedition 33, and many of the other examples that have come this year, like Blueprints, Split Fiction, Peak, Schedule 1, all of those break the rules of AAA games industry, and it showcases a different path forward. Former CD Projekt studio engineer Lost is saying data is such a bad thing to base your entire game off of. Reference to the thing that always seems to be missing context. The reason those games often do well is because of the package, our gameplay, or the idea. Larian is so punched off with their statements on the industry than the AAA studios themselves will never change Larian. Another individual, this being the former Clarion dev, basically saying in my old studio we were told which ones to look on, forced to sit in mandatory meetings so we could analyze videos of them and look for stuff to copy. No one ever questioned any game ideas. We were succeeds, there are hundreds that fail. That's not a sustainable way to run a business. It's not about understanding at all. And the one thing that's really not being discussed at all by many of these individuals is the fact that making a AAA-like experience like we have seen from Expedition 33, the bar is no longer so drastically far apart. You needed to be in a AAA studio 10 to 15 years ago. Nowadays, that's even more. And that's why when you have games like Hello Expedition 33, Split Fiction, the Yall, Blueprint, and so on and so forth. They represent the future. That's why we're going to see more and more of these indie, AA, smaller studios taking on. And no.
Friend!
That in the world of sports. And no, obviously, I don't think it's going to be coming from just random bloggers that know
Yanara.
history, but I do think we're going to continue to see many the benefit of Silksong being on gamepad.
Non sacrelate là. Da, fenestra. Non li sayang. Fadastama. Oliver Hameli. Fully venti. Cory, what's that? Oh, Cory, what's that? Friend!
Give a shit.
There's an interesting story emerged this week that Take-Two, publisher, looking. What can I say? Silksong actually allowed this weekend its rival Club to collapse just about every game in store available, making it extremely difficult to actually buy. But hats off to the developers here. It's going to be hugely popular. And John, you've been playing it, but it's not exactly a digital foundry game in terms of pushing technological limits. But you were extremely impressed with what you saw, right?
I like to cover 2D games with plenty. I admit, for starters, I wasn't a gigantic fan of the original Hollow Knight. There was just things about it. It was a bit repetitive. I didn't like the way the character looked and moved. And there was just things about it I didn't love. But I always recognized it as a great game. This one actually feels a lot nicer so far, based on what I've played. But beyond that, there is actually a technical reason here. The thing that pushed me to actually give it a shot comes down to some very uncommon features for 2D platforming games. That is, it supports ultra-wide monitors, and it runs with an uncapped frame rate. And you don't usually think about platform games when you think about high frame rates, but let me tell you, when you experience this, like I'm playing at 330 FPS for this game in ultra-wide, like the feeling you get, it's like your eyes can scarcely comprehend the fluidity that is born out of this. It feels unreal. Like it actually feels like you're physically moving objects around in front of your eyes. You know what I mean? Like it no longer looks like a digital scrolling screen. It really just looks like a physical diorama, like peering into something. It's really, really cool to see. It reminds me, there was another game I love that came out not that long after Silksong, Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, which was my game of the year it came out. That was also one of the rare PC games that does uncapped FPS with ultra wide as a platform game. So, and it really is not a common thing to see. It's very, very unusual. There's mods, like things like Blasphemous 2, you can mod it to have ultra wide, but it's a little bit broken in some ways. This just works. Like you just right in there. It's super smooth. I also installed the Reno DX HDR mod for it to tweak it further. So, I mean, I was just like in awe of like seeing this running on the screen, running so smoothly with this HDR and like the clarity of everything. And because Hollow Knight's a dark game, OLED is like perfect for it because you get that super rich, deep contrast between the blacks and the highlights. And yeah, I just wanted to highlight that like beyond being a popular big game, they're actually doing some stuff that's really unusual for platforming games. And all of this runs in Unity, by the way, which is another surprise. It's a super optimized, super clean, fast Unity game. So hats off to the developers for that.
So you're playing on PC, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, nobody's doing ultra-wide on consoles, Rich.
But obviously the Switch 2 version is available now, and it seems to be running at 120 hertz, which is another laudable thing.
So, from what I gather, the Switch version, this is secondhand, but it has 120 hertz in docked mode, but not portable. But I still need to confirm that. This is just from a friend of mine that was checking it out. I also hear that the PS5 version has 120S as well. I suppose it is on Xbox, right? It should also have. I would imagine it's also 120 FPS there. Yeah, it is on Xbox, of course.